Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, our first 2022 summer preview of our Power 5 teams. And we got Bryce Koon, who writes for 24/7 Sports, covers Georgia Tech, and is also the host of the Crowded Booth. So if you guys do like Georgia Tech football, you like Atlanta sports, go check him out. I appreciate you coming on, Bryce. How are you doing today?
Doing well, man. I'm a little nervous now. You just said I was the first one that you've done, so we'll see how either low or high we set the bar here tonight.
Yeah, I think you'll set the bar pretty high. I appreciate you coming on, though. Let's get into just how are the Georgia Tech fans feeling? Obviously, fourth year under Jeff Collins coming into, I think.
Yeah.
Probably not the expectations the fans have wanted. Going through COVID, trying to get out of that triple option offensive scheme. What's the sentiment looking like for the fans?
Apathetic, if that makes sense. So this is a fan base that feels really beaten down, and so let's take it back before Jeff Collins. You being a college football fan, obviously Georgia Tech has been known for the triple option, and so as football changed, they felt like they needed to make a change. And I think the best way to describe it is after 3 years, there's two ways you can look at it. There's fans that are, quite disappointed that want to go back. I mean, we've already seen, I can't tell you how many message board requests and questions. Can we please go hire Jeff Monken and just run the triple option again? And my answer to that is really sure, but don't complain about not being nationally relevant. And I'm not trying to be rude to the schools that do run that. It's just not a style that's going to win you a national championship and make you a contender year in and year out. So all that to say is that's half of it. The second half of the fan base, and I think that once you get off, like the Facebook groups, and you start to get into some of the people who really understand what kind of process this was. The first 2 years, okay, you knew year one was going to be rough.
Yep.
You literally didn't have the personnel to run what you wanted to run. Year two, COVID. You're breaking. I mean, you don't have obviously the normal meetings. You're breaking a true freshman quarterback through Zoom. Last year was disappointing, and the biggest thing I think is fans are disappointed because we all knew that offensively it was going to be a 3, 4, 5 year to really get the people you wanted and kind of have the personnel to be able to run what you wanted. You didn't think you'd have the defense that ranked 117th last year. That was supposed to be something that really wasn't supposed to take a drop off. And so the hope was the defense could carry it until the offense got there. It hasn't happened. And so there's a little bit of apathy of we want Jeff Collins gone. That's not a realistic scenario financially for this school.
Yeah, 7-year contract, I believe, coming in.
Yeah. So 7-year contract. I mean, it's, this is going to take time. And I think that people on my side of things kind of seeing it, you really realized how far back in the dark ages, per se, that Tech was operating, not just the triple option, but as a whole from fundraising and even the NIL era now. I mean, we're just seeing they just weren't doing that. And so trying to play catch up.
Being sandwiched between Georgia, Alabama definitely doesn't help that. Want to get looking towards that offense side of the ball. Jeff Sims, true freshman year, this dude flashed in my eyes, at least. I don't watch every Georgia Tech game, but him and Jahmyr Gibbs, and you got to be excited about that duo you had. Obviously, last year, a little bit of a disappointing season. Jahmyr Gibbs obviously gone to Alabama. What's that quarterback room looking like? What have you heard out of spring practice? And you obviously throw in Tyson Fomachan coming in from Clemson. What's that quarterback room looking like coming into the year?
I'll say this, and we actually just did a podcast episode about this. The most recent one is I think it builds legitimate competition in the quarterback room where you really didn't have that. I mean, honestly, you had guys that were recruited as athletes for a triple option scheme, a more spread option scheme. You really didn't have anybody behind Jeff Sims that was a guy that could just sling the ball all over the yard. And that's what new offensive coordinator Chip Long is going to want to do. He's going to want to, go vertical, use the tight ends. Use the running backs out of the backfield. And so I think, starting off, and you go with the true freshman they brought in this year, Zach Pyron, talented kid, 3-4 star out of the state of Alabama. I think he's going to be – he's just young. That's literally – he's just got to learn what it means to be a college football player. They bring in Zach Gibson, a former Atlanta area guy, transfer from Akron. Now, the biggest thing out of spring practice for him and going into the spring game, which I caution, take everything with a grain of salt, but there are some things – he had a little bit more zip than anybody else out there on the field. So, I mean, I think he was a little more crisp. He knew what he wanted to do. This is a guy who had one of the highest completion percentages in all of college football last year. Obviously, you talked about Jeff Sims. The kid is an unreal athlete.
Yes.
Like and so I don't, I know when I talk to people who don't watch a lot of Georgia Tech football, they talk about last year. They talk about the North Carolina game. When he was inserted back in that game, the 50-yard touchdown run that he had to ice the game, essentially. I mean, that's what they envision, him being able to stretch the field with his legs and make some plays with his arm as well. But you bring in a guy like, Pumachan and being able to have him, that guy he's a baller. Like he really is. So I think, when you're behind a guy like Trevor Lawrence, then when you're behind a guy, I'm just going to say there's too many names that Clemson has, so we're just going to call him DJU. That's what I prefer to
that's
say.
what we do here too. So,
so when you have him playing behind these guys, obviously he suffered a nasty injury as well during the spring game in 21. I just think there's more competition. Like I just genuinely believe there's real competition. And I said this on another episode or another podcast we did. And I said, no matter who suits up against Clemson and Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta on September the 5th, it's going to be a better product because of the competition that's there.
Yep.
Because you're really getting pushed. If you don't have that real competition, it's going to be tough.
Yep. I hope we get to see Jeff Sims one more year. He was the guy as a freshman. I thought was really special. Think he has a lot of juice. So we're going to see. I think that's probably a good answer. A bunch of good quarterbacks. The best one's going to emerge during the fall camp, and we'll get the starting role. In terms of playmakers, the last couple games of that season, they just could not muster up explosive plays. I believe they got shut out by Notre Dame and Georgia, two very good defenses.
Yes.
So understandable, but the lack of explosive plays it hurt. And then losing Jahmyr Gibbs, who was primarily the guy who was making the explosive plays, where are we looking to on the offensive side of the ball to kind of get some juice?
Yeah, and I'll tell you this. You lose Jahmyr Gibbs. This is what I've been telling fans ever since he went in the portal shortly after that Georgia game.
Heisman contender, I think. A sleeper Heisman contender.
Behind that offensive line and with arguably the best quarterback in college football, it wouldn't surprise me. The guy's put up 1,200 yards against a bad offensive line for Tech. So I love what Gibbs was, but I tell people this a lot. You weren't going to win a championship. Like he's staying 1 year at Alabama, and then he's going to be maybe the top running back taken in the NFL draft. Like he is an all-purpose guy. That's what he is. So the loss to me is not as big in the long run of what Tech wants to do. It just really hurts to see a guy like that leave. But going back, I think the running back room, you have a guy, Dylan McDuffie. They brought him in from Buffalo. 1,000-yard rusher.
Coach, the strength coach from Georgia Tech. I think they know each other.
Yes. So Dylan McDuffie is a guy that, 1,000-yard rusher. I don't care what level you play at. If you have that stat, that means you know what you're doing. They got a guy in Hassan Hall transferred from Louisville. They got Dante Smith returning, who was kind of just like this under the radar, really solid running back for them when Mason was hurt a little bit last year. Gibbs was a little banged up, and they were trying to rotate those guys in and out. I still think it's a strength of the team. So I think running back, you're going to have a lot of different things you want to do. I'm also going to go with this. We got the depth chart right here in front of you. And so when you look at that slots position, Nate McCollum, so this is a guy who is shifty. He is quick. He has top-end speed. And I mean it in the form of he's not going to stretch the field. He is just a very good route runner, and he can get in and out of breaks really, really good. So he's going to beat a guy on a 5-yard slant or a 5-yard out. He gets good separation. I think that's one that you're really going to have to look at. The tight end position as well. I mean, look, you got to have P.J. Harris that is moving from receiver to tight end. Luke Benson down there at the end, but they added a transfer, E.J. Jenkins. Who, I kid you not, 6'6", 6'7", 240 pounds. I mean, that's a monster. He transferred from South Carolina. So there are a lot of pieces that they have, and we may get into this. I think skill position, they've got guys like Kalani Norris, McCollum, Rutherford King, Blackstrain. They got a guy like Leo Blackburn, who's an absolute unit. DJ Moore, who is a true freshman down up there at the top of your screen of the X position. He's probably the fastest player on the team, and he's a true freshman. I mean, he's got great speed. All of those things to say, it's great to talk about skill players, but the offensive line is the big X factor for me. If they're going to have any success, it's going to be up to the offensive line.
How are we looking there then? What would you say?
Well, I'll tell you this. Last year we went into the season and we're sitting there saying, you know what? Experience, that means success. And it didn't happen that way. There's the possibility, and I mean this seriously, you're going to have 4 new starters along that offensive line. You take a look at it right here. Tachio right there from Clemson going to slide into right guard. They really love Pierce Quick as well, the transfer from Alabama. They said that he's probably the most talented guy they've got
Yep.
there. Weston Franklin, he's going to play for some time. William Lay is going to see some time potentially, but they've added a lot of guys through the portal. And just listen to a couple of those off for you. R.J. Adams, who's most likely going to be a starting center from Kentucky. You got a guy like Corey Robinson, a massive guy from Kansas is coming in. I mean, there's just multiple different options for them to go to, and I think that they have depth where they didn't have it. Listen, you know as well as I do, when you watch football, you've got to at least have 2 deep everywhere because this is
Especially
a
at that
physical
line.
sport. It's
Yeah.
physical sport. And so if you don't, and they got bit by the injury bug, once again, I say this, and with all respect to the young men who have fought to have an opportunity, they just had some guys that had to step up that really weren't Power 5 D1 offensive linemen. And that's, it's credit to them. They kind of held their own, but they just were no match, like you said, when you're playing Notre Dame and Georgia the last 2 games of the season.
Yeah, I'm a Wake Forest fan, so I get
Yes.
the idea of having guys who they need a couple of years of development before you can throw them in against a defensive line like Clemson. Georgia Tech definitely kind of in the similar boat. Recruit a little bit better from than Wake Forest, but again, there's some of these guys just need some more time to develop. Let's take a look at the defensive side of the ball. Definitely underwhelming. Worse than I expected when I was doing some prep for this. Like they were bad, especially in that secondary. And they're losing most of their starters from last year, which I guess isn't all that bad considering they were just absolutely miserable in the back end. They lose Jared Ivey and I believe Quez Jackson too, their leading tackler. Who are some guys that can step up on that defensive side of the ball to right the ship, you might say?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is probably the position that didn't have as much turnover is the linebacker position. Quez Jackson decides to leave early. But for me, you had a guy in Ace Ely who transferred in from Maryland. Just a solid leader right there in the middle.
Gotcha.
That's what they needed. Charlie Thomas is a rangy type of linebacker, great sideline to sideline speed. If you watch any of the teams that play in the playoff, you've got to have a guy that can play the middle of the field and can run sideline to sideline and make tackles. So they've got that. You hit the nail on the head when you talked about this because I've really tried to portray this in a respectful way to the athletes that are no longer a part of the program. You know, they had a guy that was drafted who played safety, Tariq Carpenter last year, Wanye Thomas, Trey Swilling. They had some of these guys, great individuals. Like, I'm not kidding. They're the guys that you want to send to media days because they represent your program in a great way. They didn't have the depth there. Yeah. So you can't play a guy, the full 60 minutes. You've got to have some type of rotation on the back end of the defense. They just didn't have it. They've brought in 2 transfers from Auburn, 2 transfers from Notre Dame. They have shored up this defensive backfield, in my opinion, to where it's almost like from a media perspective and even a fan perspective, I can't tell you who's going to start. Like this depth chart, I don't know. I just know that there's about 15 guys that are all very, very talented that they're just going to work and just see. And to me, that's what you want. Like, let's let the best athlete get out there. Let's let the best 11 play. And the biggest thing that you mentioned this, the biggest thing is I think that we're going to see a lot of those the younger guys that are coming in be the difference makers. They've got a lot of guys. I mean, Kari G from Notre Dame, Amari Harvey from Auburn. To me, when you look at the defense, we talk about the linebackers. Those 2 guys, I think, on the back end are going to be big producers for this defense.
Let me ask you one question, and then we'll kind of look towards the season projection, season prediction, you might say. How does Miles Sims look? And he's a former Michigan guy, I believe. How's he look for Georgia Tech? I'm a Michigan fan, so just a little curious.
Yeah, listen, Sims is a great athlete. I think that he is going to be a guy that will be a starter if you've got him at one of those cornerback positions. I think the combination of Miles Sims and another guy, in Miles Brooks, they're both very, very talented. Sims, to me, and for the Michigan fans out there, this is a kid that, that he's very talented, a very good athlete. He has gotten better to me in the communication aspect. Yeah. Like that was one of the things coming to spring ball that they were like, whoa, like this is for anything. When you have a job and you know what you're doing, it makes it 10 times easier to play. If you're sitting there trying to guess, and I think for these guys they've grown up now, Sims obviously a redshirt junior now. I mean, this is something for him that I think is it's huge because now he knows what his job is, he knows what his role is now, and he can take that on and run with it.
All right, so last question, then we'll get you out here. What is some reasonable expectations for the season? I'm guessing the win over under will be maybe 3.5, 4. You have Ole Miss, UCF, I believe, out of conference in the schedule. What's a reasonable prediction for this team, you think?
I saw something today, and it might have been ESPN that put it out. They put it at the over-under was like 4.5, so right around what we were just talking about. I would sit right there. I would sit at 4.5 because I think that this team is going to take a step forward just because by virtue, I don't know how you could go any worse statistically.
I don't
what they
think
were
you
doing
can on defense.
I don't think you can on defense. So they're going to have to be better. Just by the fault that, I mean, what is how many teams are in FBS? Like 120 something. So you would just be going back 3 more spots. God forbid that happens. So when you look at the schedule, though, it's not easy. Clemson week 1, you're always going to play them. They're your rival in the ACC. You mentioned it, Ole Miss at UCF, and then you have Georgia sitting there at the end of the season. They're playing Florida State, Virginia Tech, Pitt, who is just kind of done some really nice things. Keaton Slovis is over there. It's tough. And so I think to me, what would be a success, and maybe that's not answering your question the best way, but what would be a success is if they could get to like 5 wins, with one of those wins coming over a Clemson, an Ole Miss. I'm not going to say a Georgia, and that's going to make fans mad because Georgia's on a different playing field. But even going down to UCF and beating them in Orlando, like that's a big win. And I don't know how much UCF football you've watched. I haven't watched a ton. That atmosphere is tough to play in. Yes. Like that's a tough one. So if they can win 5 games, let's say 4 or 5 conference games. I mean, even if they could get 6-6. I mean, they don't have to go 10-2 this year for Jeff Collins to keep his job. I think if they go 5-7 and you see real improvements, and you say another year under new OC Chip Long, there's going to be something. To me, that'd be huge.
Yeah, and to close out, I think that's kind of what lines up with what I'm not as close to that Georgia Tech team as you are. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, coming from the triple option, then you throw in COVID. I mean, talk about installing a completely new offense through virtual meetings, almost impossible. Young quarterback, just improving both sides of the ball, being more competitive in those ACC games, I think could be a success for Georgia Tech. And I like Jeff Collins. I like what he's doing down there at Georgia Tech. So appreciate you coming on. Guys, if you guys are into Georgia Tech football, go check him. Check Bryce Koon out. Appreciate you coming on and look forward to watching some Georgia Tech football this fall.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
You.